Howdy friendos! Welcome back, I hope, to Dim Pixels, a place for retro, by retro, or something. My name is Greg, let's fun! This week, I selected a game I loved as a teen, a long time ago. Part of me wanted to re-experience it as I'd mostly forgotten what it was like, although I do recall having fond memories. That game is Eternal Champions, a fighting game released on the Sega Mega Drive, or the Genesis if you're American, and let's face it, you probably are, way back in 1993. Yes, the early 90s. Probably the time when fighting games were at their peak popularity, with Street Fighter 2 having created the market basically in 1991, and Mortal Kombat making a name for itself the year after. However, it took some time for fighters to make a splash on consoles. In fact, fighting games on consoles were not that great until Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition, and suddenly they were awesome. The Mortal Kombat port, which came not long after, was also pretty damned awesome, and Sega realized that they could probably cash in on this, so they developed Eternal Champions in-house and released it only on their platform. And yes, I do say Sega. I know it's Sega. I'm an Aussie. I grew up saying Sega. It still happens sometimes. I apologize. Anyway, surprisingly, Eternal Champions still plays well. Admittedly, the special moves are pretty hard to pull off, and the enemies are incredibly strong, but I was very pleasantly surprised when I loaded this bad boy up. So, what's good about Eternal Champions? First up, the art and the music. Just look at this awesome 16-bit pixel art and tell me it doesn't still look amazing, because you'd be wrong. Now, take a listen to the music. This shit is rad, even given the limitations of the Mega Drive. Next up, Sega wanted to do something a little different with this one. Note I said Sega. Rather than just throwing a bunch of characters together like so many other games did before, they made this one both story and character driven. There are 9 playable characters, each with their own backstory, fighting style, and a bunch more details that probably don't matter, all of whom have been pulled from different periods of time just before they died by a mysterious stranger known as the Eternal Champion. This champion has discovered that the world is about to end, mainly because these 9 individuals all died far too soon. So he brings them back so that they can fight to the death. The last one standing is not only the champion, but they'll be returned to life with the knowledge of what's coming so that they can survive and, I don't know, make the world a better place, I guess. Anyway, because of all that, the characters are varied and they play very differently. In fact, it's incredibly unique, but I've got to say it may almost be too unique. I mean, there's a cat burglar, for example, named Larson, and he's from the 1930s or something. He fights using Jeet Kune Do, which maybe makes sense, and he wears a trench coat, so he's kind of like Dick Tracy crossed with Bruce Lee. Then there's Trident, the amphibian king of the underworld or something, who fights using a trident, of course, and he uses capoeira as a fighting style, which makes no sense whatsoever. And of course, maybe, there's also a caveman with a club whose fighting style is simply pain. You gotta love that. I was gonna let that one go, but I couldn't. He makes the most sense of all. So, each character has a heck of a lot of special moves, which is both awesome and kinda sucky, to be honest, because not only do you need to remember them all, but they're unfortunately quite difficult to pull off. Now, I've played a lot of Street Fighter, so I do know my way around fighting games, but I really struggled to get my moves off in this one. I don't know why. That might be because of the special meter, or whatever it's called. I don't have the manual. This is the little yin-yang symbol that you see up next to your character's life bar, and it depletes as you use your special moves and refills when you don't. This is pretty cool because it actually restricts people from spamming moves. I kind of wish this was still a thing. I mean, it kind of is to some degree. The latest Mortal Kombat 1, includes support characters called cameos, for example, and they have timers that perform this same kind of function, so that is kind of cool, I guess. It is an old game, so movement is a little stilted and wooden due to system limitations, but it's fast and fairly fluid for what it is. I was pretty surprised. Okay, onto the inclusions. Fighting games back in the day were kind of limited. They were mostly about the main story, which is you fight a bunch of battles until you win and unlock your ending, or you fight against friends. And that was it. However, I was impressed at how much Sega tried to squeeze in here, even though it's mostly fluff. First up, there's a training mode, which is kind of weird. There are a few options here, including dexterity spheres, where you jump about and hit some balls that fly around the screen, and Holo Trainer, which is really just a one-on-one with special graphics, but at least you can adjust the difficulty, which is cool. Lastly, there's Practice Sphere, or whatever the hell the stupid thing's called. This one's pointless. It's similar to dexterity spheres, but the ball doesn't move and can't hurt you. I don't know what it's for. Maybe it helps for you to check collision, but I can't think of what else it might be used for. Still, it's nice to see a few different modes in there for practice, I guess. Beyond that, there are 2 modes for single player. There's the contest, of course, which plays out as it expected to, with the Eternal Champion as your last fight, and there's the battle room. The latter is similar to the hologram training mode, or Holo Trainer, whatever it was called, but it includes modifiers to increase the difficulty. There are a bunch of options to choose from, but only 5 of them can be activated at the same time. And that's it. For the time, that was quite a lot. By today's standards, it's nowhere near enough. Still, there's a bit more to Eternal Champions. In fact, like Mortal Kombat before it, it's quite gory. There are even finishes, but I didn't get to see any during my playtime, sadly. Actually, I learned that there's also a Sega CD version subtitled Challenge from the Dark Side, which was released in 1995. It was apparently much gorier and included some extra bits and pieces. I really should have reviewed that one, to be honest. In fact, I want to give this game a better go, so one day I'll review the Sega CD version too. Anywho, it's fair to say that I enjoyed my time with Eternal Champions, except to say that it's hard as a cat's head, which is very hard. Right from the first match, your AI enemy will block everything and hit much harder than you do. In my hour of gameplay, I played at least 1 match with each of the characters, but only won a single match, and that was only with Larson. With others, I was lucky to even win a single round. In fact, I think I only won 1 or 2. Some of it was just damned unfair, but some of it was me being impatient and thinking it was Street Fighter. It is not. It is not Street Fighter. However, I've got to say, I did get better over time, so I think it's one you simply need to invest some time in to learn your moves and understand your enemies. You basically need to play well right from the start, which clearly I did not. Anyway, Eternal Champions reviewed fairly well at the time, with a bunch of scores in the 90s. There were some lower in the 60s and 70s, but the majority of reviewers were big fans. As a result, Sega had huge plans for the title, but not much came of it. There were 2 spin-offs, Chicago Syndicate and Experts, both of which were side-scrolling beat-em-ups. Sega also marketed the game significantly. There was a Slurpee tie-in at 7-Eleven, there were promotions on MTV, and even some official game books which were released by Puffin Books, but the game never received a true sequel. One was planned for the Saturn, apparently, but it was cancelled in favour of Virtua Fighter, which is a bit sad, although I do like Virtua Fighter. And although it's not really a port, I was surprised to learn there was a version of Eternal Champions released for the Tiger handheld system. Eternal Champions was also a pack-in game for the Sega Activator, so players could kick and punch their way to victory. Huzzah! But they didn't, because the Sega Activator was shit and nobody bought it. Well, very few people at least. If you want to play it now, there's emulation and original hardware, of course, but it was also included in the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis Classics bundle, which is available on Steam. I recorded this via emulation, only to discover afterwards that I had it on Steam already. Not a big deal. Honestly, there's a great game here. It really just needed some tweaking, particularly for the few early matches, just to ease players in a little better. For the 90s though, it was friggin' brilliant. I loved it at the time, having rented it from my local Blockbuster, but I do recall it being quite difficult. In fact, I'm not even sure if I ever reached the final boss. Anyway, that's all for now, but I will be back next Monday with another retrospective. I hope to see you again. Let's play all the games.